Hi, welcome to Virtual CB1A. This is Miss Rena, and we are in Chapter 2 of Elementary Statistics, exploring data with tables and graphs. So we are going to start this chapter by by citing this chapter problem: fast food restaurants, which one is fastest? Okay, so one attractive feature of fast food restaurants is that they are just fast. To remain competitive, fast food restaurants must not only provide a good culinary experience but also must do it as quickly as their competitors. So we have a data set. Here is our data set. So this is the drive-through service times in seconds for McDonald's lunches. Ilan ba to? 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So data set 25, fast food in Appendix B, list measured service times in seconds obtained from samples of drive-through customers at different restaurants. Table 2-1 lists the 50 service time measurements from the first column of dataset 25. It is an exceptionally rare person who can simply look at those data and form meaningful conclusions. So, kapag ka ibinigay sa inyo to, by merely looking at it, can you give a reliable conclusion? So, di ba? Napakahirap. So, we mere mortals must work at describing, exploring, and comparing the different lists of service times to gain meaningful insights. In this chapter, we present methods that focus on organizing and summarizing the data para isang glance lang, pwede na tayo magbigay ng message dun sa readers. Okay. Yan. These methods will help us compare the restaurants. These are the chapter objectives. Characteristics of data. So we are going to find the center, a representative value that shows us where the middle of the data set is located. There are three methods of finding the measure of central tendency or measuring the center. We have the mean, the median, and the mode. Next, variation, a measure of the amount that the data values vary. Dito marami rin tayong pwedeng gamitin for the variation. Pwede tayong gumamit ng range, pwede rin tayong mag-perform ng finding standard deviation, finding the variance, pwede rin coefficient of variation. Depende dun sa given na data. We are going to differentiate each of them later. Now, let's talk about the distribution. This is the nature or shape of the spread of the data over the range of values, such as bell-shaped. If you still remember, I think na-discuss natin to nung first year kayo. If we have a bell-shaped curve, that means our population is normal. Next, outliers. Na-mention na natin to before. Pag sinabi nating outlier, these are extremely high or extremely low values. These are values that differ significantly from the rest of the data set. So sample values that lie very far away from the vast majority of the other sample values. Now let's talk about time. This is any change in the characteristics of the data over time. So this chapter provides tools that enable us to gain insights into data by organizing, summarizing, and representing them in ways that enable us to see important characteristics of the data. Here are the chapter objectives. First, under frequency distributions for organizing and summarizing data, I already gave you a video link for this topic. Nandun siya sa cumulative review. You have to develop an ability to summarize data in the format of a frequency distribution and a relative frequency distribution. For a frequency distribution, identify values of class width, class midpoint, class limits, and class boundaries. Medyo mag-delve lang tayo deeper on how to properly construct frequency distributions for this video discussion. Next, we have histograms. Develop the ability to picture the distribution of data in the format of a histogram or relative frequency histogram. So examine a histogram and identify common distributions, including a uniform distribution and a normal distribution. So again, we are going to work with bars. Now, let's talk about graphs that enlighten and graphs that deceive. From the first chapter of our book, meron tayong dalawang sample ng figure, dalawang sample ng graph. If you still remember yung 65-35% of those who prefer printed books at saka e-books. So 65% of the respondents preferred printed books and 35% preferred e-books. Medyo may discrepancy dun sa appearance nung graph. Bakit? On the first graph that was presented, the bar graph, hindi proportional. So, magkakaroon ng maling assumption yung titingin kasi hindi siya nag-start sa scale na 0. Nag-start na siya dun sa kalahati, 30% na kaagad. Now, for the other graph, yun namang pictograph, hindi naman proper yung representation ng picture kasi hindi proportional sa isa't isa. Dapat 1:2 lang, pero about 1:4 yung naging representation ng sizes ng mga pictures natin, which is wrong. So, here you have to develop an ability to graph data using a dot plot, stem plot, time series graph, Pareto chart, pie chart, and frequency polygon. I think that plot is already given dun sa mga video lectures na i-sinend ko sa inyo. Si stem and leaf plot. Dun sa sinend ko sa inyo video, this is called stem and leaf plot. Time series graph, Pareto chart. Pareto chart, meron din tayong example. Pie chart, meron din. Both by using Excel and using Microsoft Word. And then, frequency polygon. Ito, hindi siya definitely nakalagay na title na frequency polygon. Pero actually, parang nagbigay ako ng video nito. I am not sure. But either way, magbibigay naman ako ng example mamaya. So, maiintindihan natin kung paano ginagawa ang frequency polygon. And also, you will determine when a graph is deceptive through the use of a non-zero axis or a pictograph that uses an object of area or volume for one-dimensional data. So, for scatter plots, correlation and regression, ito yung huling-huling topic natin for this chapter. You will develop an ability to construct a scatter plot of paired data. So, ginagamit natin ang scatter plot kapag meron kayong paired na data. Merong dependent variable, may independent variable. Next, analyze a scatter plot to determine whether there appears to be a correlation between two variables. There is a proper formula for finding the correlation, R, of between two variables. And also to perform regression if there exists a correlation. So, malalaman natin kung ano yung possible na values niya in the future by using regression formula. But, by merely looking at the scatter plot between the two variables, pwede na natin ma-define kung may correlation or wala. Pwede natin siyang i-examine without finding the value. Visual examination lang. Now, let's go to the first part of this chapter. We have frequency distributions for organizing and summarizing data. This is an example. McDonald's lunch drive-through service times. So, ito yata yung nakalagay dito. Ayan. Let's see. Yes, ito yon. 50 sila, 'di ba? Check nga natin. 11, 24, 10, 34. Oo, tama. Ito yon. Key concept when working with large data sets, a frequency distribution or frequency table is often helpful in organizing and summarizing data. A frequency distribution helps us to understand the nature of the distribution of the data set. Let's start with the definition. What do we mean by a frequency distribution or frequency table? This shows how data are partitioned among several categories or classes by listing the categories along with the number frequency of data values in each of them. So these are the classes, 75 to 124. This is the first class. Yung pangalawang class natin, we have 125 to 174. And then, yung frequency, kung ilan yung nag exist within the given interval. So, sa interval natin na 75 to 124, ilang McDonald's lunch drive-thru service yung nagsasatisfy dun sa 75 seconds to 124 seconds. So, merong 11 na branches. So, let's use the McDonald's lunch drive-thru service times in seconds listed in table 2-1. So table 2.2-2 is a frequency distribution summarizing those service times. The frequency for a particular class is the number of original values that fall into that class. For example, the first class has a frequency of 11. So the service times are between 75 seconds and 124 seconds inclusive. The following standard terms are often used in constructing frequency distributions and graphs. Pakitandaan ito ng maigi. First definition, we have the lower class limits. So these are the smallest numbers that can belong to each of the different classes. So pagka sinabi nating lower class limits, ito yung pinakamaliliit na value or pinakamababang value sa bawat class. So ang titingnan nyo lang yung nasa left. So kung lower class limits ang hinahanap, then we will have 75, 125, 175, 225, and 275. Okay? For the upper class, syempre, yung pinakamataas na number naman. These are the largest numbers that can belong to each of the different classes. Ang titingnan naman, yung nasa kanan. We have 124, 174, 224, 274, and 324. And you have to take note that the sizes between each interval ay laging parehas. Okay? Now we have class boundaries. Class boundaries are the numbers used to separate the classes, but without the gaps created by class limits. So figure 2-1 shows the gaps created by the class limits from table 2-2. In figure 2-1, we see that the values 1 to 4.5, puntahan natin yung figure. Asan yung figure? Oops, medyo hindi ko na siya magamit. Ayan, ito yung um, figure natin for finding class boundaries from class limits. So if you still remember, from our table, ang first class natin ay 75 to 124. So step 1, list the class limits from table 2-2. So unang interval, unang class, we have 75 to 124. Pangalawang class, 125 to 174. Pangatlong class, 175 to 224, and so on until we reach 324. Step 2, split the difference as shown. Ayan. Next, find the first and last values of 74.5 and 324.5 by projecting the same pattern. So dito, in between, pasimplihin na lang natin. When you're finding the class boundaries, all you have to do is to subtract 0.5 from your lower limit and then add 0.5 on your upper limit. So, ang pinakamababang class boundary natin ay syempre yung lower class boundary ng first na class, which is 74.5. And then, syempre, ang pinakamataas natin na class boundary ay yung 0.5 plus the value 0.5 from our last upper limit. So, ang huling upper limit natin from the last class is 324. Add 0.5, we have 324.5. So, para simple na lang, subtract 0.5 from the lower class limits, you will have 74.5, and then ang nagsiseparate between 124 and 125 is 124.5. So 124 plus 0.5 is 124.5. 125 minus 0.5 is 124.5. So makaka-create kayo ng pattern dyan. Laging yung upper class boundary ng class ay equal dun sa lower class boundary nung susunod na class. Okay? Okay. Nasaan na tayo? Bumalik tayo sa sampling error. Teka lang, mag-scroll ako pababa. Nag-stemplat. Saglit lang. Napa-advance tayo masyado. Ang layo. Ayan. So, define tayo ng susunod. We have class midpoints. Ang class midpoints naman, these are the values in the middle of the classes. Table 2-2 has class midpoint of 99.5. Next is 149.5, 199.5. Paano natin madaling mahahanap ang class midpoint? Ang gagawin mo lang, i-add mo ang lower class limit at saka ang upper class limit, tapos i-divide mo siya by 2. For example, 75 to 124. Ano ang lower class limit natin? Meron tayong 75. So, si 75, dagdagan natin ng 124. So, 75 plus 124 is 199. Tapos, i-divide natin siya by 2. 4. Okay, you will end up with 99.5. So, the class midpoint of the first class is 99.5. Next, 125 to 174. I-add naman natin sila. 125 plus 174 is 299. Tapos i-divide mo siya by 2. You will end up with 149.5. So just follow the process. And if you want to check, these are the other midpoints. 199.5, 249.5, and 299.5. Okay? Now, let's talk about class width. Ito yung sinasabi ko kanina, lagi yung parehas, is the difference between two consecutive lower class limits or two consecutive lower class boundaries in a frequency distribution. So, dito, the first two lower classes are 75 and 125. Lagi yung parehas. Basta magkasunod. Medyo malikot yung ginagamit kong reader. Pasensya na. So, magkasunod na lower class limit, 75 to 125. 125 minus 75, your class width is 50. Next, 175 to 125. Edi 175 minus 125, 50 rin siya. Next, 225 and 175. 225 minus 175, 50 ulit. 275 minus 225, 50 ulit. So, basta, ang kukunan nyo ng difference ay laging magkasunod. Okay? Okay. So, these are the important terminologies that you have to remember for this chapter. So, caution. Finding the correct class width can be tricky. For class width, don't make the most common mistake of using the difference between a lower class limit and an upper class limit. Iba yung magiging sagot nyo, lagi kayong kukulangin ng isa. For example, 75 and 124. Pag sinubtract mo yan, 49 lang. So, laging ang kukunan nyo ay magkasunod na lower class limit. O kaya, magkasunod na upper class limit. Parehas lang din naman yun. Kung magkasunod na upper class limit yung kukunin nyo, parehas pa rin. But, do not get the difference between the lower and the upper. Hindi pwedeng sila yung magka-partner. Lower, lower, upper, upper lang. Next, for class boundaries, remember that they split the difference between the end of one class and the beginning of the next class. Okay. Procedure for constructing a frequency distribution. So, ito yung uniform na procedure. First, you have to, we construct frequency distributions to summarize large dataset para hindi siya confusing tingnan. Next, see the distribution and identify outliers. And three, have a basis for constructing graphs such as histograms. So technology can generate frequency distributions, but here are the steps for manually constructing them. Number one, select the number of classes, usually between 5 and 20. The number of classes might be affected by the convenience of using round numbers. So according to Sturgis guideline, the ideal number of classes for a frequency distribution can be approximated by 1 plus log n over log 2, where n is the number of data values. We don't use this guideline in this book. Next, calculate the class width. So the class width is approximately equal to the maximum data value minus the minimum data value over the number of classes. Next, round this result to get a convenient number. It's usually best to round up. Using a specific number of classes is not too important. And it's usually wise to change the number of classes so that they use convenient values for the class limits. So ito, yung Sturgis guideline, hindi naman kailangan na lagi mo siyang i-apply or hindi kailangan na lagi mo siyang sundin. For example, dito kay McDonald's, bakit tayo nagsettle with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Kasi in-approximate natin kung ano yung mga convenient na values na pwedeng gamitin. Nag-ano tayo, pumili tayo ng mga numbers na visually appealing. 'Di ba? Compared to other numbers, those that are in interval, nasa interval ng 5, 10, 20, mas convenient siya tingnan. So, dito, we have 75. Kung gagawin natin itong 73 to 124, medyo hindi siya appealing tingnan, di ba? So, you have the free will to adjust your values depending on your liking as long as you are following our guides here, yung mga steps natin, okay lang yon. Next, number 3, choose the value for the first lower class limit by using either the minimum value or a convenient value below the minimum. So, sabi nga natin, pwede kayong pumili. Dito sa example natin sa table 2.1, kung mapapansin nyo, wala dyang 75. Ang lowest niyan ay, I think, 91. Balikan natin, ha. Ito. So, lowest value nito, 90. Okay, the lowest value is 90. Wala kayo dyan makikitang 75. But, our frequency distribution started with 75. Why? Kasi mas convenient siyang gamitin kesa magsimula tayo with 90. Okay? Okay. Now, let's continue. Using the first lower class limit and the class width, less the other lower class limits. Do this by adding the class width to the first lower class limit to get the second lower class limit. Add the class width to the second lower class limit to get the third lower class limit, and repeat this procedure until you reach the last class. Number 5, list the lower class limits in a vertical column and then determine and enter the upper class limit. So, nagsisimula tayo sa lower class. Tapos, kapag ka na-enumerate mo na lahat ng lower class, magsusubtract ka lang ng 1 para sa upper class. So, di ba ang lower class natin dito? Una ay 75. So, meron tayong class width na 50. So, 75 plus 50 is 125. Plus 50 ulit, 175. Plus 50, 225. Plus 50, 275. So, to get the upper class limit, wala pa tong mga to, magsusubtract ka lang ng 1. 125 minus 1, 124. Yun yung unang upper class limit natin. Sumunod, 175 na. 175 minus 1, 174 naman. And so on until you reach the last class. I hope that was clear. Ayan. Gawin natin yung McDonald's lunch service times. Kanina pa natin tinitingnan yung table, pero ngayon, i-explain natin kung paano siya nakuha. So, dito nga, sabi natin, uh, you have the freedom to choose the number of classes that you want to use in your frequency distribution. You can choose any number between and including 5 and 20. So, ang pinili natin ay 5. So, 5 as the number of desired classes. Calculate the class width as shown below. Note that we round 45 up to 50, which is a more convenient number. So, class width natin, maximum data is 3. Aba, may 83 pala. Ba't di ko nakita yung 83 kanina? Check nga natin. Napansin nyo ba yung 83? Napansin ko lang 90 eh. Kung nakita yung 83. Ayun, may 83 nga. Hindi ko siya napansin kanina. Sorry. May 83 pala. Sensya na. Okay, next. Yan, di ko na maibaba. Wait lang ah. Okay, baba tayo. Ano ba to? Balik tayo. Okay, class width, that is the maximum data value minus the minimum data value. So, 308 minus 83, tapos number of classes natin is 5, we have 45. And then, we are going to round it up kasi mas appealing ang 50 kesa kay 45. So, the minimum data value is 83, which is not a very convenient starting point. So, go to a value below 83 and select the more convenient value of 75. Kung gusto nyong maglagay ng 70, okay lang din. As the first lower class limit, we could have used 80 or 50 instead. So, kung gusto nyo lower than 75, you can go as low as 70 as long as you will still satisfy the number of classes na nakuha natin dito sa step 1, yung desired number of classes mo. Pwede rin naman na round down to 80 lang. Okay lang din yan. So, step 4. At itong 50 pala, hindi ko to na-check kung okay lang din siya. Kasi hindi ako sigurado kung mag-exceed na siya dun sa desired number of classes natin, which is 5. So, hindi ako sigurado dito sa 50. Hindi ko pa siya tinatry. If you want, you can try and then you can tell me kung ano yung resulta. Kung nagsasatisfy din ba siya sa 5 classes or sumobra na siya. Next, step 4. Add the class width of 50 to the starting value of 75 to get the second lower class limit of 125. So, ito nga, mauuna yung mga left na value. 75 plus 50 is 125, plus 50 is 175, plus 50 is 225, plus 50 is 275. Ayan. Step 5. List the lower class limits vertically. Ayan. From this list, we identify the corresponding upper class limits. Minus 1 lang. 125 minus 1, 124. Dito mo siya isusulat. Sa tabi ni 75. Sa right ni 75. And then, 175 minus 1. Sa right naman siya ni 125, which is 174. Step 6. Enter a tally mark for each value data. or data value in the appropriate class. Then add the tally marks to find the frequency shown in table 2-2. Okay. So, 75 to 124, bibilangin mo lang kung ilan lahat ng between ng 75 and 124. So, sabi 11 daw. Check natin kung talaga. Unang class lang yung i-check natin ha. Yung mga sumunod hindi na. So, 75 to 124, we have 1, 83. Yan. Magtatali ka lang. Isa, 83. Nilagay ko na siya dito ha. 124, edi 107, 100, 124, 117, pasok pa. 101, 91, 113, 90, 124, hindi na kasali si 127. 117, 119, 124, 124. Ito, 123, pasok pa. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So, tama. There are 11 values. That is between 75 and 124. So, ganun lang yung gagawin. Bibilang lang kayo. If you want a more detailed explanation or detailed procedure on how this works, meron tayong isa pang video lecture, yung isinend ko sa cumulative review. Tinuro ko rin kasi siya before sa pang third year. Pero actually sa inyo na math majors, pang ganito lang yun. Pero iti-take nyo pa ulit to ng third year eh. Hindi ko alam kung ba't ganun yung curriculum natin. Okay, balik tayo dito. Categorical data. So far, we have discussed frequency distributions using only quantitative data sets. But frequency distributions can also be used to summarize categorical or qualitative or attribute data. So this is example 2. Emergency room visits for injuries from sports and recreation. Let's look at table 2-3. Ayan. Mas madali to actually. Kasi hindi ka magkukuha ng range. Ang gagawin mo lang, tally. So, this table 2-3 lists data for the highest 7 sources of injuries resulting in a visit to a hospital emergency room, ER, in a recent year, based on the data from Centers for Disease and Control. The activity names are categorical data at the nominal level of measurement. But we can create the frequency distribution as shown. It might be surprising to see that bicycling is at the top of this list, but this doesn't mean that bicycling is the most dangerous of these activities. Many more people bicycle than play football or ride an all-terrain vehicle or do any of the other listed activity. Okay, so this is arranged from highest to lowest. So, nakarank po siya. Now, let's talk about relative frequency distribution. So, a variation of the basic frequency distribution is a relative frequency distribution or percentage frequency distribution, in which each class frequency is replaced by a relative frequency or proportion or a percentage. In this text, we use the term relative frequency distribution, whether we use relative frequencies or percentages. Relative frequencies and percentages are calculated as follows. Relative frequency for a class, that is the frequency for a class, divided by sum of all frequencies. If you still remember from earlier, for the first class, 75 to 124, we have 11 values in that class. So, ang gagawin mo lang ay i-divide mo siya by the sum of all frequencies or the total number of your data values. Ang data values natin, lahat-lahat ay 50. So, that is 11 divided by 50. So, to compute, so makikita nyo dito si relative frequency. I-affix nyo lang yung percent symbol after multiplying it by 100. So, check natin. If you have your calculator, compute 11 divided by 50. You will end up with 0.22. Then, multiply it by 100 or move the decimal place 2 units to the left Tapos, i-affix nyo or idikit nyo yung percent symbol. So, the relative frequency is 22%. For the second one, we have 48%, next 20%, next 6%, and next 4%. And when you total everything, you should end up with 100%. Kung hindi yan nagtotal ng 100%, you have to make some adjustments. Baka may mali kayo sa rounding off numbers. So, please be careful when you are rounding off. Okay? Next, cumulative frequency distribution. Ito naman, may mga i-add tayo kasi papataas naman siya. Um, ayan. So, dito hindi na siya nakaano, 74 to 125. Hindi, 75 to 124. And then, 125 to 175, dito naka-less than lahat. Bakit? Kasi i-include mo lahat ng mga nadaanan niya. For example, we have less than 125. Lahat-lahat sila ay 11. And then less than 175, included na yung 11 na nandito. So, balikan natin yung table kanina. Paano kaya gagawin ko? I-paste ko na lang siya somewhere so you can see it clearer. Hindi tayo pabalik-balik. Okay, since we are going to use this table as a reference, ipe-paste ko siya dito. Yan. Para pwede natin siyang balikan anytime. Saglit lang give me at least 1 minute to work on this. Medyo naglalag kasi yung laptop ko talaga. Okay. Ayan. So, gagamitin nga natin siya lagi. 'Di ba? Lagay na rin ako dito ng calculator para nakikita niyo kung paano ko nagko-compute. Pause ko muna. Tapos, balik ako kapag okay na. Kasi nga lagi siya. Okay, so balik tayo. Meron na tayong calculator dito. Tapos magkalapit na si um, frequency distribution natin na original. And then, yung cumulative frequency distribution. As I've said earlier, isasama lang natin lahat nung magsasatisfy per class. So, instead of having the class width na 50, we have 75 to 124. This time, everything that is less than 125. And you have to take note, when we say less than 125, hindi kasali si 125. Lahat lang na mas mababa sa kanya. Magkaiba ang less than sa less than or equal. Okay? Pagka ito, less than, hindi kasama yung value na 125. Kung less than or equal, saka mo lang isasama si 125. So, nakalagay dito ay less than 125. So, please, wag nyo isasama si 125. Dito rin, less than 175. Hindi kasama si 175. You will end with 174. 225, mag-e-end kayo sa 224. 275, mag-e-end kayo sa 274. Kung merong point yan, edi hanggang 0.9. Pero wag na wag nyo isasama si 275. Yung exactly equal dito. Okay? Okay. So, balik tayo. Um, less than 125, meron tayong 11. Ayan, 11. Less than 175, edi lahat ng nasa 75 to 124 at saka 125 to 174. So, si 11, ipa-plus natin si 24. Ipa-plus natin tong dalawa. So, we have 11 plus 1, 2. Ay, mali. 11 plus 24, which is equal to 35. Kaya 35 na yun nandito. Next, less than 225. Eh, dito naman siyang tatlo. 11 plus 24 plus 10. You already have 35 here. So, just add 10. So, plus 10. You will end up with 45. Next, we have 3. So, lahat naman silang nandito. We have 45 plus 3, so 48. Next, meron tayong 2. Yan, papalaki lang yung bracket natin. We have 48 plus 2, 50. So, ang guide natin dito, until you reach the total number of data values that you have. Dun sa original na table natin, table 2.1, ang number of samples natin ay 50. So, dapat sa cumulative frequency, ang huling-huling value nyo dito ay equal sa number ng data values. Okay? Okay, I hope that was clear. Ayan, nandito na tayo sa last part. Critical thinking na tayo. Using frequency distributions to understand data. Ayan. At the beginning of this section, we noted that a frequency distribution can help us understand the distribution of a dataset, which is the nature or shape of the spread of the data over the range of values, such as bell-shaped. In statistics, we are often interested in determining whether the data have a normal distribution. So this is going to be discussed extensively in chapter 2, but I think meron na kayong introduction dito from our GE 114. Nung first year kayo kasi nag-stat tayo doon. Data have an approximately normal distribution are characterized by a frequency distribution with the following features. Una, the frequencies start low, then increase to 1 or 2 high frequencies, and then decrease to a low frequency. So, tingnan natin yung dataset natin dito kung nagsasatisfy siya. So, nagsisimula muna siya sa mababa, and then tataas over the next 2 classes, and then bababa ulit. So, is this normal? Do you think it is normal? Next, the distribution is approximately symmetric. Frequencies preceding the maximum frequency should be roughly a mirror image of those that follow the maximum frequency. Ano ba maximum frequency natin dito? Our maximum frequency is 24. And then, isa lang yun nandito niya. Dapat symmetric siya. So, if we have 5 classes, we expect the highest frequency to be on the 3rd class so that it will be symmetric. Papababa siya dito, papababa rin siya dito. Okay? Table 2-6 satisfies these conditions. So, tingnan natin si table 2.6. Ayan. So, take note, hindi ito katulad nung kanina natin, ha? Hindi ito yung sa McDonald's. Same lang siya. Same classes, same values for the time. Same intervals tayo, same class width. Pero yung frequency dito iba. Ayan. So, ang maximum value natin ay nasa pinakang gitna. Kung meron kang 5 classes, dapat ang pinakamalakas na value mo ay nasa gitna. And then, pababa siya. Tapos, pababa rin siya dito. Or, papataas siya mula sa unang class hanggang sa gitna, tapos papababa na siya mula sa gitnang class papunta sa dulo. Ayan. So, this is a normal, an example of a normal distribution. Yan, 2, 8, 30, 8, 2. Yan, symmetric siya. Nagre-reflect yung first 2 classes dun sa last 2 classes. Tapos, ang point of reflection niya, itong gitnang class. Next, analysis of last digits. So, example 3 illustrates this principle. Frequencies of last digits sometimes reveal how the data were collected or measured. Example 3, exploring data. They were likely counted for 30 seconds and the number of beats was doubled. The original pulse rates are not all multiples of 4. So we can rule out a procedure of counting for 15 seconds and then multiplying by 4. Analysis of these last digits reveals to us the method used to obtain this data. So last digit ng pulse rate natin ay 0. So meron tayong frequency na 455. Tapos walang may last digit na 1. Mayroong last digit na 4, walang last digit na 3, walang last digit na 5, walang last digit na 7, walang last digit na 9. So, pwede nating i-rule out yung for 15 seconds lang, kinount yung pulse rate kasi meron tayong nag-e-end sa 6. Tapos merong mga numbers ending in 6 that is not divisible by 4. So, hindi siya pwedeng maging 15 times 4. Okay? In many surveys, we can determine that surveyed subjects were asked to report some values, such as their heights or weights, because disproportionately many values end in 0 or 5. This is a strong clue that the respondents is rounding instead of being physically measured. And it is a fascinating stuff according to our author. Ayan. So, makikita nyo yung um, pattern kung paano inobtain yung data. So the presence of gaps can suggest that the data are from two or more different populations. The converse of this principle is not true because data from different populations do not necessarily result in gaps. So, hindi po siya pwedeng baligtarin, ha? Sometimes, the presence of gaps can suggest that the data are from two different populations. But that doesn't mean na kapag kagaling sa two different populations, ay lagi na tayong magkakaroon ng gaps. Minsan, kahit na magkaibang population sila nang galing, walang gap. Next, example 4. Exploring data, what does a gap tells us? Is table 2-8 is a frequency distribution of the weights. These are in grams of randomly selected pennies. Examination of the frequencies reveals a large gap between the lightest pennies and the heaviest pennies. This suggests that we have two different populations. First, we have pennies that are made before 1983, which are significantly ano ba to, lighter or ano, parang uh, lighter. But pennies made after 1983, which explains the large gap between the lightest pennies and the heaviest pennies. Ayan. Magkaiba kasi sila ng composition. Next, comparison. Combining two or more relative frequency distributions in one table makes comparisons of data much easier. Yan, mag-compare tayo nito. McDonald's and Dunkin' Donuts. Ayan. So, para mas makita natin yung difference nila, pwede natin silang pagsamahin sa isang table. Yun lang naman yun. Okay. Ay! Problems na tayo. So, basic skills and concepts. Ayan. Sagot ulit tayo ng few exercises. Number 1, McDonald's dinner service times. Refer to the accompanying table summarizing service times in seconds of McDonald's dinners. How many individuals are included in the summary? Is it possible to identify the exact values of all the original service menus? Okay, so ito yan, table number 1. Unahin natin yung tanong na how many individuals are included in the summary. All you have to do is to add all the frequencies. 7 plus 22 plus 14 plus 2 plus 5. Compute tayo? Okay. Kuha lang ako ng calculator. Ay, nawala yung yung problem natin. Kanya-kanyang calculator na lang kayo. Kuha kayong calculator. 7 plus 22 plus 14 plus 2 plus 5. So, meron tayong 50 na individuals included in this summary. Is it possible to identify the exact values of all the original service items? Service times. No, hindi. Kasi naka-interval siya. So, hindi presented sa atin yung original na table. If the original table was presented to us, then we can identify each of the original service times. But in this case, no. Okay, number two, McDonald's dinner service times refer to the accompanying frequency distribution. What problem would be created by using classes of 60 to 120, 120 to 180, 300 to 360? If you can, if you will take notice here, 60 to 119 tayo. Hindi tayo 60 to 120. Tapos 120 to 179, not 120 to 180. Bakit hindi natin to pwede gamitin? Kasi there will be a confusion on assigning the values exactly equal to 120, 180, and those that share the same upper and lower. Kung ito ay 120 sa upper, tapos ito ay 120 sa lower, saan mo ilalagay yung exactly 120, di ba? So, pwede siyang mapunta dito sa first class. Pwede rin siyang mapunta dito sa second class. So, dapat hindi sila mag-overlap. You have to take note that you cannot have overlapping intervals for or overlapping class widths. Overlapping classes. Hindi pwede yon. So, dapat distinct yung mga values mo for the lower and upper class. Okay? So, bawal to. 160, 120, 120, 180. Kasi mag-share sila sa ilang values. Next, number three, relative frequency distribution. Use percentages to construct the relative frequency distribution corresponding to the accompanying frequency distribution for McDonald's dinner service times. Gawin natin to. Si number three. Pe-paste ko lang to dun sa kabila. Siyempre, ipopause ko muna siya para hindi kayo mainip. Okay, balik na tayo. So, ang kailangan daw natin dito ay yung relative. Ay. Relative na lang yung isusulat ko, ha? Okay, relative frequency distribution. So, yung percentages, syempre kunin muna natin yung total nito. Nakuha na natin to kanina and it was found out to be 50. So, for the relative frequency distribution, all we have to do is to identify the frequency for that class. Sa class number 1, we have 7 and then divide it by the total number of data values. We have 50. So, 7 divided by 50, we have 0.14 or 0.14. And then multiply it by 100 and then affix the percent symbol. So we have here 14%. Next, we have 22. 22 divided by 50, we have 44 or 0.44, which is 44% when multiplied by 100. And of course, do not forget to attach percent sign. 14 divided by 50, we have 28%. Next, 2. 2 divided by 50, we have 4%. Finally, we have 5. 5 divided by 50, we have 0.1 or 10%. Now, we have to check. Equal ba to lahat sa 100? So, dapat pag in-add mo yan lahat, you will end up with 100%. Let's try. 14 plus 44 plus 28 plus 4 plus 10. So, equal siya sa 100%. Therefore, our relative frequency distribution, 14% for the first class, 44% for the second, and 28 for and 10% for the other three classes is correct. So thank you very much for listening, and then we are going to move forward to our next topic. Pero sa nasusunod na video na yon. Thank you and bye!